For our friends online, we will be starting momentarily.
That was a great song. Thank you. Good morning. My name is Stacy Salisbury, and I'm on the Board of Trustees. I'm also part of the Spiritual Practices team. Welcome to our service. Unitarian Universalism encourages an open-ended search for meaning in life and a commitment to asking our values to shape our actions. We are a pluralistic religion that draws wisdom from many sources. We welcome all people into our beloved community of whatever age, race, class, ethnicity, ability, sexual orientation, gender identity, or religious background. Have a wonderful service. Bye.
Technology, we're all just trying to figure it all out here. So let's see if we can you see? Oh, it can't see me through my mask. That's a disadvantage of having those, passwords that look at your face. But just a couple of quick notices about Spotlight today. Ken Crokin is here today, and after service at 11 o'clock, he will be talking about juvenile justice and the juvenile detention center, and so we ask that you stay for that. Very important information. As well, also that we are planning October 20th, hopefully, a big welcome back party on the lawn, and we hope to have some events and other things, and there is going to be a planning meeting for that at 12 o'clock today, or right after Ken's presentation, so please stay for that if you can. And then just to keep in mind, we will be yes? What did I say? The 17th. Thank you. The 17th, that would be a Sunday right after service, the 17th, because today is the 10th, 7 days, the 17th. Thank you. I don't know why I wrote the 20th here, but we can have another party on the 20th if people would like to, but we're planning for one on the 17th. And then also just a reminder that in November we will be having a congregational meeting to vote on the 8th principle. And so I believe it's October 20th that is when we are having another 8th principle discussion. So if you want to know more information about that, attend that. As well as on October 20th, that's where October 20th came from, thank you. We are having a UU 101 class, so if you know of someone who is interested in finding out about becoming a member here, or just wants more information about Unitarian Universalism, we encourage you to invite them. And so now our opening reading today is by Robert Walsh, and it is called Fault Line. Did you ever think there might be a fault line passing underneath your living room? A place in which your life is lived, in meeting and in separating, wondering and telling, unaware that just beneath you is the unseen seam of great plates that strain through time, and that your life, already spilling over the brim, could be invaded, sent off in a new direction, turned aside by forces you were warned about but not prepared for. Shelves could be spilled out, the level floor set at an angle in some seconds shaking. You would have to take your losses, do whatever must be done next. When the great plates slip and the earth shivers and the floors seem to lie in what you trusted most, look not to more solidity, to weighty slabs of concrete poured, or strength of cantilevered beam to save the fractured order. Trust more the tensile strands of love that bend and stretch to hold you. In the web of life, that's often torn, but always healing. There's your strength. The shifting plates, the rest of earth, your room, your precious life, they all proceed from love, the ground on which we walk together. Please join me now as I light the chalice to show us the way on that path. In the light of truth, and in the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to inspire.
Hi, I'm Diane Cameron, a member of this congregation. We acknowledge the traditional owners of country on which our congregation's grounds are located, the Kickapoo, Peoria, Sauk, and Meskwaki, Yamyaki, and Oshikoshakawan, and recognize their continuing connection to land, waters, and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging.
Good morning. Please rise in body and or spirit for our opening hymn, Be Ours, a Religion, which we will sing twice. Be ours ours, a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere. Its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love. Be ours a religion which like sunshine goes everywhere, its temple all space, its shrine the good heart, its creed all truth, its ritual works of love.
So I have to say, I found the opening reading so moving because it feels like tectonic plates, honestly, are shifting in our world. Everything seems to be changing. And when everything is changing, what do we have to hold on to? The tensile strands of love, the ground on which we walk together. Although I don't use the word tensile very much in my day-to-day life, I do think that flexibility is so important these days, right? I do think that everybody is just so stressed and the future so unknown, right? Look, just even looking here, missing so many people. And so when these things happen, it's important. It's important to understand what our identity is, both as individuals, as a congregation, right? To better allow us to withstand the vicissitudes of life. One question we always ask about identity is how much of our identity is past versus present versus our future and vision. And I am helped by this, by my Jewish roots. There's long been a discussion in and about Judaism as to whether its identity was as a religion, a culture, or a race. And Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, who was the founder of Reconstructionist Judaism, believed Judaism was a civilization that was progressively evolving. And I sort of, that related to me for Unitarian Universalism as well. You know, it had deep roots to the past and traditions of Judaism, but instead that it had to be planted in the present and deal with the life as it is, not as it was. Kaplan famously said, tradition has a vote, but not a veto. Kaplan also identified religious identity in three ways: belief, behavior, and belonging. And so he posited that Christian identity focused first on belief, in their case, creedal belief that Jesus was the Messiah. And if you had right beliefs, it would theoretically lead you to right behavior, and then as well by doing certain rituals and by behaving in certain ways, you belong to the larger Christendom. So Kaplan felt Judaism's identity was not belief. That was on the lowest rung, right? But rather primarily belonging. It was a sense of belonging to the Jewish people. Behaviors such as rituals were just ways to reinforce a sense of Judaism. So as one rabbi wrote, doing Jewish stuff, we feel Jewish. So I wonder what that means for Unitarians doing Unitarian stuff. We feel Unitarian. So that's something we can think about. So I tried to think about this whole question of belief, behavior, and belonging in regard to Unitarian Universalism. And the first thing I want to say is I think that that question alone creates a false trichotomy. The first time I've ever used that word in a sentence. And because I think all three are important, right? All three. There's always a creative tension between all three of those. I think similar to Judaism, there is a strong sense of belonging when it comes to Unitarian Universalism. Right? People who've moved away from this congregation still years later have remained members, right? Because we are a part of their identity, and I think that does speak well of us. People who are no longer formal members of the congregation still consider themselves Unitarian Universalists. They still at least abstractly identify with us, which does leave sort of that existential question: can you belong to something you literally do not belong to? And so I think that's an interesting question. But we do have this sense of belonging, though, as a group of people who've eschewed traditional religions, but still find meaning in meaning-making together, in community. There's a sense of belonging to a long tradition of free religious thought and expression. There's a sense of belonging to a history of people who have continued to struggle to grow spiritually and religiously, belonging to a history of people, however imperfect, who have worked for improvement of humankind in the world. We belong to a long line of people without which we would not be here to even ask such questions as we continue this tradition. So I would agree, history has a vote, but not a veto. Famously, when it was a Universalist minister, was asked where he stood on a particular issue, he said, "We don't stand, we move." Right? Meaning we adapt to the changing world, and we go out into the world, and we are part of it, and we move. And we are adapting to make meaning in new ways, honoring the past, but not bound by it. So belonging to Unitarian Universalism means belonging to and accepting and adapting to change. And due to our pluralistic, non-creedal nature, we, similar to Judaism, would probably not value beliefs as high as belonging or behavior. But I am always drawn to the reading that's in our hymnal by religious educator Sophia Faz, entitled, "It Matters What We Believe." Proposing that we should aspire to, and I'm quoting here, beliefs that are expansive and lead the way into wider and deeper sympathies. Beliefs that are like sunshine, blessing children with the warmth of happiness. Beliefs that are bonds in a world community where sincere differences beautify the pattern. Beliefs that are like gateways opening wide vistas for exploration. Beliefs that nurture self-confidence and enrich the feeling of personal worth. Beliefs that are pliable, like the young sapling, ever growing with the upward thrust of life. End quote. So it's not the particulars of the belief It's not the particulars of belief that we require, rather the question of whether your beliefs make you, this congregation, the world, a better place. I often say, due to our theological pluralism, our theology is a relational theology. How we interact with each other is what matters, which brings me to Martin Buber's book, I, Thou. where he's a Jewish theologian, where he differentiates what he calls I-it relationships with I-thou relationships. I-it relationships is when we see people as objects. I-you or I-thou relationships is where we see the inherent worth and dignity and wholeness of each other. In the I-it relationship, we experience people only from our own perspective. And he compares that to I-thou relationships, wherein we understand the interdependence of all things. He uses as an example, which was very helpful to me, because some of this is very really deep theological writing, and sometimes I'm like, what does that mean? But he uses this relationship, which I found very helpful. The examples of tones that compose a melody, or lines in a statute, or words in a poem. So, you can break apart all of that into multiplicity of all the individual tones, lines, and words. And individually, they are only I-it objects on their own. Only when they are brought together is the I-thou created. Right? So on their own, those words have meaning, but only unto themselves. But put together, they create something much more beautiful and profound. So we are similar, I would say, for human beings, right? And congregations and societies. We are all a multitude of many, many things and experiences, right? A congregation of many individuals. But we can only know as a whole in relation to each other, not individually. So how are we known as a congregation, right? As a spiritually growing, justice-seeking congregation, or just a bunch of people gathering and doing their own thing and showing up whenever they feel like it, right? All of the different parts of us make up the wholeness of each individual. All of the parts of the congregation make up the wholeness of the congregation. We cannot know ourselves or the congregation only from our own internal perspective or in the particular, but rather only in relation to everything and everyone else in their fullness. That is the thou relationship. Buber goes on to argue that actually it is hate, not love, that is blind. Hate only knows a portion of the other. Love engages and is open to all parts of the other. Buber writes, and I quote, "Only when we encounter another individual truly as a person, not as an object for use, do we become fully human." And when two people relate to each other authentically and humanely, that is what he says is where God is found. And Buber does not limit this I-thou relationship to just between humans. He believes this I-thou relationship exists between human and nature as well. Only when we see nature in its whole and ourselves as a part of it and interdependent with it will we be in an authentic I-thou relationship with it. As Buber writes, and I quote, "I consider a tree. I can look on it as a picture. I can classify it as a species and study it as a type in its structure and mode in life. In all this, the tree remains my object, occupies space and time, and has its nature and constitution. It can, however, also come about if I have both will and grace that in considering the tree, I become bound up in relation with it. The tree is now no longer it. To effect this, it is not necessary for me to give up right? Any of the ways in which I consider the tree. The tree is no impression, no play on my imagination, no value depending on my mood, but it is bodied over against me and has to do with me, right? As I have to do with it. End quote. Let us remember this about nature, right? Being in relation to it, to realize that our fate is tied up with the fate of nature, that we are interdependent with it, just as our fate as a congregation is tied up with the fate of each of us together. Although it may seem strange that Unitarian Universalism, being so non-ritualistic, would prioritize behavior, but really what we have written down, think about it, we have covenants and policies that spell out how we will behave with each other very specifically. And in contrast, we specifically do not have things in writing that this is what we believe. You could say our principles are like that, but they are very broad and not specific. So I think mostly when I think about this, our covenant of right relations, which you will see at the entrance of the sanctuary. And I do think the placement matters, right? Prior to a couple of years ago, it was actually hidden behind the whiteboard, and no one ever saw that. And I'm sure that was probably unconscious. Maybe years ago, that whiteboard wasn't there, and we just never moved it. But putting it at the entrance says, as you enter this sacred place and this sacred time, and then as you leave it to go out into the world, take this covenant, this, how we treat our fellow human being, into account. All the words in the world, though, will mean nothing if we do not live them out in our actions. Right? So one of our covenants is participation in congregational life and worship. One of the covenants of right relationships also says, gifts imply responsibility. To the best of our ability, we will foster the programs and outreach of this congregation. And so with that in mind, we will now take our offering. Our offering this month, we are sharing 50% with TMBC, together making a better community at the Lincoln Center, a hub for resources, professional services, programs, and events for the African American community in the Quad Cities. We ask you to be as generous as you can. Once you've had that opportunity, we invite you to come up to light a candle to mark a joy or sorrow in your life. Let this sacred time begin. So recognizing we all have joys and sorrows, some have been written, just so everybody's aware. We have a book of joy and sorrows that you can enter in. It's right outside the sanctuary if you want something read during the service, and there are a few. First, joys. This week, this is from Tracy and Brian Tufty. This week we celebrated our 14th wedding anniversary. Congratulations. And even more, we actually got a babysitter, went out and had a nice meal and enjoyed being together. So congratulations on that too. Yes. That's big. Also, Marcy Doyle has a joy. Much gratitude for my son David's current health and the birth of his son, David, last Tuesday. So I saw pictures on Facebook. Unbelievably cute, yes. A number of sorrows. Marge Trailer, just to let you know, is in the hospital and not doing well. Kent Hill as well. It was in a bicycle accident, had to be flown to Iowa City. I believe he is back now in the Quad Cities Hospital, though, and I'm sure they would appreciate getting cards or messages of notes from members, knowing that, keeping him in your heart. Marcy Doyle also has a sorrow, missing Lee, I can't pronounce the... Gillian. An artist, performer, and friend from New York City. And there were a couple of online ones as well. I'm not watching the Jet game. I'm actually tracking our online notes here. And so Amy Key, the Key family's joy is that we closed on our new home on Friday. So let's give them a round. That's always exciting and a lot of work. Tom is thankful to teacher Rod Allen, who introduced me to Martin Buba, and also to all who are taking part in the 8th principle discussions. Thank you. That attendance has picked up the last couple of times. Diana is so happy for the Keys on their new house, and also thankful for all who participate in the 8th principle conversation. And I believe that is all so far. Something comes in later, I will let you know. So let us all recognize the joys and sorrows in our lives, as well as the joys and sorrows in those we care about, those in our community, and in everyone, because everyone has joys and sorrows. So let us take a moment of silence to just ponder those. Bring us out of the silence with the words of Hafiz. Out of a great need, we are all holding hands and climbing. Not loving is a letting go. Listen, the terrain around here is far too dangerous for that. Hold on.
None of us is born the same. We don't know why. It's the way we came. Every heart beats a little differently. Each soul is free to find its way, like a river that winds its way to the sea. For life is a journey, and there are many roads beneath the sky, and there are many good people who don't see eye to eye. You and I are different from our brother. Could that be why we need each other as we go along? Everyone is partly right, and everyone is partly wrong. Not everyone can sing your tune from where they stand. There's another view. With every turn, we're learning more, and perhaps we'll find that the walls we build are only in the mind. There are many roads to go, and they go by many names. They don't all go the same way, but they get there all the same. And I have a feeling that we'll meet someday, where the roads come together up the way. There are many roads to go, and they go by many names. They don't all go the same way, but they get there all the same. And I have a feeling that we'll meet someday, where the roads come together up the way, up the way, up the way, together up the way.
Beautiful. So, yeah, the title of the service was Cultivating Relationships. I want to focus for a moment on the word cultivating as part of that. Now, I admit when I think of the word cultivating, I think of farming the land, growing something, nurturing it over time. And I admit, I don't know the first thing about farming. But that is what the internet is for, or I stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last week. I don't know, for those of you who like commercials on TV. But the funny thing is, I did actually research about cultivating farmland, and I found actually it's a really good metaphor for cultivating I-thou relationships and cultivating a congregation. First, it's important to know what type of soil you are cultivating and what type of food grows in that type of soil. Or else perhaps a different soil is needed if you want to grow something else specific, right? So I think that's also true for a congregation. It's why we create a mission and vision, an annual vision of ministry. Why the board thinks and adapts our strategies for an ever-changing landscape. It's important to know what type of congregation we are and what type of congregation we want to be. Similarly, it's important to know what type of relationships we have and what type of relationships we want to have. If we want to have deeper, more meaningful relationships, relationships with a diverse group of people that will help us grow, right? We might recognize that we need a different type of soil or some new knowledge or some new experiences, right, to help us achieve that if we want to grow as individuals. We have to participate in the whole, not in the particular, right? We have to be part of the whole, interdependent with everyone else, which means joining with others in meaningful programs that allow you to know others and yourself more deeply. A seed does not grow on its own. It needs the proper environment around it to grow. Next, in cultivating the land, we must till the soil. This means turning over the soil and aerating it, right, to clean it out so that there is room for growth and so that the nutrients that go into the ground can be effective. And often, there is a lot of junk and weeds, right, in the ground that comes up when we till the soil, even our own soil. Sometimes it takes more than one digging to clean it out. I think that's true with us as individuals and a congregation as well. When we are in the midst of change or we talk about new and challenging topics, it's going to bring up uncomfortable feelings and thoughts. And if you leave them buried right in the ground, it will prevent growth. We need to provide space for new soil, new ideas to take root. And it may not happen overnight, right? It may require time to work through it. But that working through them is the only way to transcend them. And next, I read, is to install fencing to protect what you are cultivating. And I think about what we did out in the garden here. You can just look right out in our garden. We have fencing around our garden, right? Even with that fencing, a groundhog dug in from underneath the fencing, right? I heard at last count, we had actually captured, humanely, I am told, 17 groundhogs on the grounds. I don't know if it's the same ones that keep coming back, or they're new ones, or ones that were hidden that we didn't see before, but we've captured 17 groundhogs. Now, I have nothing personal against groundhogs. They look cute from a distance, and they are part of the circle of life, right? But we would never grow our food to provide for those in need if we let the groundhogs harm the food that will nourish others. And similarly with a congregation, although we can certainly respect each other's differences, sorry about that. Although we can certainly respect each other's differences of opinions, we have to create certain boundaries so as not to allow harm to come to each other, right? We should strive to be the spiritual nourishment of each other, right? Just as with farming, we cannot always control the things that will affect the crops, right? So we need to be able to cultivate our ability to surrender control. I know that's probably the hardest for most people, right? Because we can't always control everything, right? And what other people do and say, right? Just like with crops, you have bad weather, persistent groundhogs, bad seeds. So too in our lives and lives of the congregation. We need to set our ego aside, our need to be right, and allow for the creative interchange, even as I said before, right, the creative tension of ideas. And if we can do these things, right, without being harmful, right, we can create the environment where these I-thou moments and relationships can happen. First, we must choose to want that. And then we must allow ourselves to become aware of the possibility when the opportunity arises. And then we have to have the courage to enter into them when that opportunity arises. So I ask you, what are you cultivating in your lives? Let us find the courage to see each other and to love each other. It is the only hope for us, individually, congregationally, and for the planet itself. May it be so. Please join us for our closing hymn, number 318, We Would Be One.
We would be one as now we join in singing our hymn of love to pledge ourselves anew to that high cause of greater understanding of who we are and what in us is true. We would be one in living for each other to show to all a new community. We would be one in building for tomorrow a nobler world than we have known today. We would be one in searching for that meaning which binds our hearts and points us on our way. As one we pledge ourselves to greater service. With love and justice, strive to make us free.
Our closing words are from Adrienne Marie Brown, Emergent Strategies. When we are engaged in acts of love, we humans are at our best and most resilient. The love and romance that makes us want to be better people. The love of children that makes us change our whole lives to meet their needs. The love of family that makes us drop everything to take care of them. The love of community that makes us work tirelessly with broken hearts. If love were the central practice of a new generation of leaders, it would have a massive impact. if the goal was to increase love rather than winning or dominating a constant opponent, I think we could actually imagine liberation from constant oppression. We would suddenly be seeing everything we do, everyone we meet, not through the tactical eyes of war, but through the eyes of love. We would see that there's no such thing as a blank canvas, an empty land, or a new idea, but everywhere there is complex, ancient, fertile ground, full of potential. We would understand that the strength of that movement is the strength of our relationships, which could only be measured by their depth. May it be so. Please join me now in extinguishing our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. And now I invite you, our friends online, as well as everybody here, I'd like to invite up Ken Crokin, fellow member, and as well Scott County Supervisor, to share about the Juvenile Detention Center and issues in our community.
Yes, the people demand it. Understood.
There's still 17 of them waiting to listen.
Excellent. Well, I thank them, and I thank all of you who are putting in the extra time to listen to my story. And it's a complicated story. And every time I tell it, I later think, gee, I wish I had tried that slightly differently. But let me tell you about our juvenile detention center and the declining number of juvenile detainees. So back in the 90s, the courts and child development in general came to understand that juveniles were not merely short grown-ups, that they were different creatures altogether, and they operated in ways different from grown-ups, all to do with brain development and emotional, all manner of issues. And as a result of that embrace of science, something we seem to be not all that willing to do as a nation, but between the 20 years leading between the 90s and where we are today, the number of juvenile detainees nationwide dropped by about 2/3. And I believe that we're better for that. Locally, we also have seen a decline in the number of juvenile detainees, notwithstanding the daily endless repetition of every infraction that happens in town as the lead story on our daily news programs. In fiscal 19, we had an average daily population in our juvenile detention center of 24. The following year, that dropped to 22, and in fiscal 21, that number dropped to 18. Hooray. Where did these kids go? Well, they were referred mostly to community-based services, which are wildly more effective and dramatically less expensive than running a jail. So, which cost upwards of $100 a day, putting that issue all to one side now, out of the blue comes the Scott County Board of Supervisors to commission a study to determine how big a juvenile detention center we need. Our consultant came back and said, you need a 64-bed juvenile detention center. Why? Why would we need, because, and it turns out they just, if you didn't do anything different in this many years, population would grow and crime would grow and kids would, be more plentiful. And so they come up with 64. And our county board endorses that plan to a degree and is now on track to build a 40-bed facility that is expandable to 60 beds. Again, the math just doesn't work. So, what will this cost? It'll be about $20 million. Who will pay for it? You will. They found a way of, not yet, they haven't, but they're working on it. They found a way of taking our American Rescue Plan dollars that have been given to us to make strategic investments in our community, stabilize our families, and try to make whole those who were particularly victimized by the pandemic. So they've found a way of taking about $5 million of those dollars, and they'll use that. They'll raise your taxes. They'll borrow from the future. They'll do just about anything short of a referendum, because, that might not fly. That might not go the way they want it. So why are they doing this then? I mean, I find it incomprehensible. And the one thing that will not be said publicly by anyone other than me, because it was only said privately to me, is there is a misguided scheme afoot that if we can build the largest, and it will be, the largest per capita juvenile detention center in the state, we can import a lot of other people's kids to our community, and we can make money. Well, we can't make money because it will cost $2.5 million a year to operate this $20 million facility. And if you sold every bed for the highest possible rate, you couldn't make the money back. So it's a dopey plan, but never let that stand in the way of progress, right? So I have been stridently opposing this thing for all of those reasons. But the reason that I want to get you all as exercised as I am about this is the recent report issued by the Sentencing Project, which is a DC-based not-for-profit organization that is, his mission is to reduce the role of incarceration in our justice system. And much to our shame, it has been revealed to us that Iowa leads the nation in the disproportionate incarceration of Black children. We incarcerate 271 of every 100,000 Black children in the state. The national average is 133. So we are more than double the national average for incarcerating these children. Now, remember that those numbers are based on state aggregate population numbers. So that's the 3 million Iowans and but in fact, 2/3 of Black Iowans live in only 5 of our 99 counties. Johnson, Lynn, Polk, Blackhawk, and yes, Scott. So you can only imagine that the percentage of Black children being incarcerated in Scott County is even higher than the 9 times more likely would be even higher here. Now factor on top of that the Latinx population, and you find yourself, which also resides primarily in 5 counties, you find yourself with children of color being incarcerated at 9 times the rate, more than 10 times the rate of their white counterparts. This, to my way of thinking, this is immoral, but if you don't share that perspective, it is just dumb. The other research that we come to understand now, and I don't find this research as compelling as some others, but it certainly is reflective of the notion that when a community decides to set itself up as a mecca for incarceration, it actually does more long-term harm to public safety than good. When people are brought to a community for incarceration, the state research would suggest they tend to stay there. Their families tend to relocate there as well. And in the long run, you end up with more problems rather than fewer problems. I'd like to leave it there and allow you to ask me anything you want to know before I tell you what I want you to do about this. So, yes, ma'am? Sadly, no. They don't want a referendum because a referendum would be required if they were to issue bonds. But if they're not issuing bonds, then there's no requirement for a referendum if the county is not incurring debt. So by raising taxes, by taking ARPA dollars, and by borrowing from future economic development projects, no referendum is required. This is not to say the public is completely unable to do anything about this, but a referendum is not one of our abilities, sadly. Thank you. November of 2022. And Mr. Maxwell is up for re-election at that time. Mr. Maxwell, when I brought a proposal that would bring a $500,000 pilot project for free to Scott County to increase the number of community services that were available to take these worst of the worst offenders under its wing. Mr. Maxwell's comment was, I don't want and I quote, those folk let go to commit more crimes and such. I'll leave it to you to decide who those folk are in that scenario. You were going to ask a question. Yes, was it not you? Okay.
I was going to ask, the input that's been gathered from local health agencies, organizations that provide input, one way or the other.
No, Vera French does already work in this area, but they have not been requested to come in and look. The state planning agency, and that brings us to another part of the story. The state planning agency, whose job it is to decide these things, or recommend, maybe not decide, has said we don't need a 40-bed facility. And let me just put sort of a parenthesis around this conversation for a moment, because I might confuse you. Trust me, we need a new juvenile detention center. Our juvenile detention center is just shy of shameful. The wall shackles have been removed, but the holes in the walls are still there. It's in a former car dealership in downtown Davenport. If you've seen pictures, it's appalling. The nature of the building contributes not at all to the purpose of rehabilitation. And so we need a new facility. We just don't need a new facility for 40 or 60 children. And then again, this can get also very complicated. The Iowa Code, and I don't know how many of you have occasion to get into the Iowa Code, but it's a funny document. In some cases, it is so vague as to give you no indication whatsoever as to what they actually want you to do. And in other places, it's so oddly specific that you think, geez, where did that come from? But the Iowa Code today, and this is an instance of the latter, dictates that we cannot have more than 272, again, oddly specific, right? No more than 272 juvenile detention beds in the state. Guess how many we have? 272. So all of the beds are spoken for, including the number allocated to Scott County, which is 18. So it would actually be a violation of Iowa law to then build a facility for 40 beds. In fact, the training school in Eldora went ahead and built an addition, and they probably could have used it, of 6 beds that they've never been able to open because of the state code. And yet Scott County is moving forward with its plan to build this. You know, we're out buying property, and we've commissioned, interestingly enough, the same consulting group that recommended we needed 64 beds, interestingly got the contract to develop the architectural plans for the 40 to 60 bed facility. So, you know, we're paying them, we're buying land, we're doing all manner of things that, to my way of thinking, is illegal, and I will raise that. I forgot why I went down that trail. Oh, okay, so, you know, no one thinks we need these beds other than 4 of our 5 supervisors. So, you know, no one's asking Vera French, no one's asking. I'm so pleased, by the way, with our, I dug a little deeper myself this morning. You know, the Lincoln Center, the Lincoln School Project Center is working very hard on this and other issues. So hooray for them. So I think I responded to your question. Yeah. Yes.
Is the recent history of at-risk youth involved in car thefts, is that being used as an excuse or impetus to get a new juvenile detention?
Relentlessly that's being used. You know, this generation of young people we have, if one more person says to me, when I was a boy, my father would kick our asses if we, you know, I was a boy when they were a boy, and we weren't so great. I remember very vividly doing things that I should not have been doing. And, you know, we'll start a sign up of the perfect people, you know, later maybe, to identify them. But this current generation of people, they're finishing high school in higher rates, and teen pregnancy is down. You know, this is not a particularly contemptible generation of children that we're all so mad at them that we want to put them in jail. One of the reasons why there has been an increase, you know, joyriding is not a new thing. There's a lot of attention on it right now. You know, again, every day we hear yet another story, I think. But there was a time not so long ago, like a few years, when if kids were apprehended in a car that wasn't theirs, the driver was arrested and everyone else in the car was sent home with parents. That was changed to now everyone in the car is arrested. The old theory was that there's no evidence. I mean, I don't buy this, but okay. There's no compelling belief that everybody in the car knew what was happening. Gee, I wish I'd stopped doing that. Sorry. There's that the other kids maybe didn't understand what was happening, and so they were let go less. I'm not sure I'd go for that, but the point of taking them all in, whatever its value, it's increased the numbers. So the number of incidents hasn't been particularly higher, but the number of kids reportedly involved is higher. So it's artificially inflated, if you want to think of it that way. So yes, that's a big issue. Yeah. Other thoughts and. Well, I want to thank you for taking time to listen to me and close by asking you to, this is what I have to do. Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes, I'm headed right into it. Yeah. This is what I have to do with my class at St. Ambrose. At the end of the class, I have to tell them what it is I want them to remember. This will be on the test. If you could walk away from this believing that, or knowing, if not believing, children of color are 10 times more likely to be incarcerated for a juvenile offense than their white peers, that would be a wonderful thing. And if you could remember that community-based services are dramatically more effective and significantly less expensive than incarceration as a way of restoring young people to productive lives, which some of us made it and maybe some of us didn't, but the goal is to get as many as possible restored. If you could take those two facts and share them with any bus driver who listened to you, nothing can happen on this juvenile detention center until the Iowa General Assembly acts. The Iowa General Assembly has said it will not take up this issue during the special sessions devoted to the redistricting, so they cannot take it up until the regular session, which begins mid-January, on or about Martin Luther King Day, ironically enough. So it's, if we could get this information around to as many people and develop a community-wide perception that if your community is jailing children of color in such disproportionate and otherwise inexplicable ways, the solution is not a bigger jail. The solution is reforming the system that's creating this enormous number of children that they imagine need jailing. We need a system that produces fewer detainees, not a jail that offers more cells to put them in. Because like the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. So I believe that we as people of goodwill or faith or whatever we might be, our best defense is to ensure this doesn't get built. And that's where we have to draw the line in the sand. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Ken, are you okay if we take that recording and post it?
You can do anything you'd like with it, absolutely.